The Burning of Teldrassil, one of the most dark and tragic events in Azeroth's history. Many lives were ultimately lost at the single order of Sylvanas Windrunner, the current war chief of the Horde at the time, who, upon reflection of her High Overlord's disobedience, opted instead for the burning of the World Tree Teldrassil. But what if the events had played out differently? What if, instead of the World Tree's destruction, another took its place? What if Teldrassil survived, but Malfurion paid the ultimate price? Greetings and salutations, everyone. So yes, today we're going to be discussing what it would have been like had Malfurion been killed like Sylvanas had originally planned, and that Teldrassil was ultimately spared because of it. Obviously, that means many events are going to be altered and changed to make such events play out this way, but it'll be very different from how it was portrayed in the game, essentially. Before I begin, I should note that I am actually a fan of Malfurion's character. While he's by no means my favorite, I want to assure everyone that I don't have any ill will to him and fans of him or fans of the Night Elves. And I also don't think that my alternative route is better than what is currently canon. This is just a fun scenario that I've considered since the events first played out. So, without further delay, let's begin. The War of Thorns reached its peak. Ashenvale, Darkshore, and now even Teldrassil was in the mercy of the Horde. They've nearly won the Battle of the War of Thorns, but one enemy, the biggest thorn in their entire plan, Malfurion Stormrage, remained alive and a threat to their plans. With him gone, the Horde's victory was assured, and Kalimdor would soon be theirs to claim. And so it was the Banshee Queen who chose to fight against the first Druid personally to assure their victory and the wound that would fester within the hearts of the Kaldorite people. But Sylvanas struggled against her foe, who proved much mightier than she had initially thought. And if this would continue, Sylvanas would eventually lose. Suddenly, a sharp and recognizable axe dug into the back of Malfurion Stormrage. The Archdruid would fall over, confused and injured.
A dishonorable blow. I regret it.
Regret nothing. You did well.
It was not my place to interfere.
My victory was inevitable. He was merely wasting my time. Finish him and be done with it. Take a moment if you like. Then take his head. Meet me at the World Tree.
You have led your horde in service of death. You will regret this day.
As Sylvanas left Sarfang to his own devices, the orc pondered on what to do with the Archdruid. He had dishonored himself with this single strike. This was wrong. Killing Malfurion was wrong. His words were not wrong. He had played right into Sylvanas' hands, and he would doom the Horde to the path of death. So, he would not kill Malfurion Stormrage. Not this way, anyways. A binding of light would emit around Sarfang, preventing him from doing anything further. Tyrande Whisperwind was here now.
You did not kill him, Orc. Why?
I struck without honor. I did not deserve to end him.
This entire war is without honor. How dare you spill so much innocent blood for nothing?
Not for nothing. We spill blood so that the Horde will endure. Take him to Darnassus and both of you will fall when we conquer it. Or flee somewhere far from here, so that you both survive.
Malfurion rose up from Tyranda's grasps. She was doing all she could to help contain the wound that he was now suffering from. Without her aid, he likely would have been in too much pain to even stand. Malfurion looked to Tyranda thoughtfully. This was a look of finality to it. The two spoke in their native tongue. One final time. Malfurion would glance at Saurfang and offer his own ultimatum. Take the Horde from their lands or suffer nature's wrath. At first, Saurfang thought the druid was bluffing. If he had any form of final trick up his sleeve, he would have used it by now on the Horde. But the look was serious, and he could tell from their past battles he and Tyranda had enough strength to take him down 10 times over. Saurfang would back away from the two and leave to warn the Horde of what was to come, whatever that was. Malfurion and Tyranda would embrace one another, one final time as long as they were able. The forest would tell Malfurion when Saurfang would arrive and speak of what was to come. He would give them time to retreat or time to stay. Tyranda reluctantly and painfully would take a hippogriff to Darnassus to warn her people of what was to come. It pained her more than anything to leave her husband's side, but in the end she knew he was doing this not for just her, but for all of their people. She cursed the Horde for what they were taking away from her. Some within the Horde would obey Saurfang's warning and board their ships or go through portals to get out of there. Sylvanas was reluctant to believe in Saurfang's ramblings, though, and was fumed by the idea of him not killing Malfurion when he had the chance. She'd ready to have the tree be burned with this, but before she had time to give the order, a massive gust of wind would begin to topple and rip apart their ships, demolishers, and soldiers. Sylvanas' eyes grew wide as Malfurion, with all remaining strength that was left within his body and spirit, commanded a great tornado that tore apart the Horde's invasion. If not for Saurfang's warning, the vast majority of the Horde's forces would have been wiped out. Sylvanas remained, though, and she would not let this foolhardy attempt go unpunished. He may have wiped out their forces entirely, but she still stood, and she would fire away her blackened arrows at Malfurion, until finally they made their mark. Malfurion, with all his fury, strength, and power, would destroy what remained of her forces, and would ensure Teldrassil's survival in a last-ditch effort. He succeeded, but at great cost. Malfurion would have died from expanding his power, but Sylvanas quickened it with her dark magic and dark arrows. Sylvanas knew of Malfurion's power as she saw it firsthand, but did not expect this, and didn't even know he was capable of such a feat. Sylvanas was forced to retreat with the rest of her forces after this. The Horde would have to regroup and try again, but that would also be foolish given the circumstances. Already the Alliance reinforcements would arrive and bulk up around Teldrassil. While the Horde did have Ashenvale Forest and parts of Darkshore, it was only a matter of time that they would lose that too. This was a steep loss for the Horde, and Sylvanas blamed Barak. If he had just done what she had asked of him, the Horde would have been victorious. She didn't care about his honor or the strength of Tyranda, Whisperwind, and Malfurion. She knew he could have done it, but hesitated. All she could take away from this was the fact that she killed Malfurion, and that was the only victory she could take, really, from this battle. Barak blamed himself for the loss of Hold soldiers. Yes, perhaps he should have killed Malfurion when he had the chance, or at the very least cripple him from doing what he did, but he also couldn't have killed Malfurion in that way. He was torn and he was guilty, but he was not nearly as guilty as he could have been. Many of the Horde's lives were still saved, and those who remained behind did so for their so-called war chief. He had heard how Sylvanas braved a heavy storm and fired away countless arrows at Malfurion until he fell, but Saurfang knew Malfurion would have fallen regardless. The old soldier had far more respect for Malfurion than he did for his war chief, especially after seeing her give the order to burn the World Tree with all inside. He was more than grateful for that not occurring. He could not stomach such an event ever happening. And while many of the Horde would view her as a brave warrior for facing such a storm alone, and such a threat alone, he would hope that they would also note her for wanting genocide and wanting that tree burned. He knew the Horde would view him potentially as a coward for wishing to flee, but they did not see the storm coming for all of them at the time. With Teldrassil saved thanks to Malfurion, Tyrande would go to find him, though everything told her that he was dead. She hoped, she prayed to her goddess that it was not so, that he had somehow miraculously survived. She found his body though, shot with countless arrows, and he did not move. Malfurion was truly dead, and this rocked Tyrande to her core. She wanted nothing more for him to be at her side, to embrace him just as they did for years. She roared with agony and pain, ripping out every last one of the Banshee's arrows from his body. She would come for her and come for all of the Horde who took him away from her. Many of the Horde still occupied the Kaldorai's lands, and while Teldrassil was more than occupied by the Kaldorai and the Alliance's armies, she would not rest until every last one of them was driven from her home. She would avenge not only Malfurion, but all the lives that they had taken from her in this senseless war by any means necessary. Just before the Battle of Lordaeron, the Alliance held a service and funeral for Malfurion Stormrage at Teldrassil, as well as those who died at the War of Thorns. Tyrande at this time was wrecked with sadness and anger. The tribute had the leaders, friends, and night elves of all sorts sing tales of Malfurion's accomplishments, and how he died a hero to his people, and for all of the Alliance. And that they would not only remember him, but avenge his death. The Alliance would answer the Horde's blatant assault on Teldrassil in kind by assaulting the city of Lordaeron. While some of their forces would be sent to help occupy near Teldrassil to ensure their people and the tree's safety, the rest of the Alliance would be deployed to assault the city of Lordaeron and the Undercity. Sylvanas, wishing to punish Varrock for his failures, opted instead to have him help her defend her city with the rest of the Horde's leaders. While Varrock did have his reservations with Sylvanas, he would help defend the Forsaken's home, not for the war chief, but for the people who lived there. With Teldrassil's survival, Saurfang's guilt did not flare up as bad as it did with the city's survival. Still, he had driven the Horde to war with the Alliance into another ceaseless battle, and he could only wonder why. He had told Tyrande once it was so that the Horde would endure. But now, for the very reason for their war only led to war on 2 continents rather than just the one. And this would open to the rest of the continents as well over time. Reflecting on his failures and his life with a young troll known as the Khan, who attempted to befriend the upset veteran. And while, again, Varrock was not nearly depressed and driven to death as he was, he would be stirred to keep fighting for the Horde regardless of his doubt in his war chief and the Horde, though that would later be proven to be put into question much later. The battle for Lordaeron would play out the same way. Just as before, Sylvanas would lead the Alliance into a trap, using Anduin's naiveness to her advantage to make it appear as if she would surrender to him peacefully. But Lordaeron would be used as a deadly cage, and that cage would be filled to the brim with deadly plague. Luckily for them, Jaina would teleport them out, and they would all fight another day. With Saurfang arrested and taken to the stockades, Lordaeron lost, and Teldrassil remaining intact, the Horde was not looking so favorable. While the Alliance did lose a considerable amount of soldiers in both the War of Thorns and the battle for Lordaeron, things were looking far more favorably in the Alliance than the Horde, with the Great Tree still intact. While Sylvanas believed Malfurion's death would kill hope for the Night Elves, it instead roused them and their leader to fight on and avenge the Fallen. Both sides would need far more ships if they were ever going to win this war, and so the Horde would reach out to the Zandalari, and the Alliance would reach out to Kul Tiras. Not many differences would occur with either of them. The Horde would topple over Prophet Zul and Gahun's plans, the Alliance would rekindle Jaina's family's relations, deal with the Drust, and imprison Lady Ashvane. Anduin would have his talks with Sarfang, and the two would agree on thwarting Sylvanas as the leader of the Horde, together rather than apart. And he would do this by letting him go to recruit like-minded individuals such as Thrall. Thrall being greatly upset and disturbed by the death of Malfurion Stormrage, who he had also considered to be a friend of his, and would of course join the fight against Sylvanas, who was twisting the Horde into something dark. In the meanwhile, Tyrande would lead the charge in ridding the rest of their wilds of the Horde. She would accomplish this by taking the power of the Night Warrior in the name of her late husband and all who died in the War of Thorns. She would have vengeance for her lover, and she would have Sylvanas' head on a pike. Nathanos Blightcaller would be positioned heavily within Darkshore at the command of his war chief. His initial task was to help retake the lands that they had lost when Malfurion had summoned his storm. Nathanos was also given 2 powerful Valkyr by his Dark Lady to rouse the dead from their previous war. He was not prepared for the wrath of the Night Warrior though, who alongside her daughter, Chandra's Feathermoon, would take out one of the Valkyr, depriving Sylvanas yet another one of her angelic beings, and further pushing her closer to Death's Door. While Nathanos too benefited from the same realm Sylvanas was thriving from this war, he was not able to contend with Tyrande's power, and was forced to flee with his 2 new allies. It would not take as long to retake Darkshore given the vast amount of Kaldorei that still existed. Because of this, the Horde would have its own problems on the mainland of Kalimdor, as the northern reaches of the continent were quickly being retaken by the Night Warrior and the Kaldorei army. Even the Wardens from the Broken Isles, led by Maiev, would help join the fight, as they would not let the justice of their fallen go unpunished. Though there were some fears of Tyrande taking on such a terrifying power and the consequence that often came with it. But for the moment, Tyrande's rage and fury was contained for only the Kaldorei's enemies. This resulted in the Kaldorei's eventual and total victory over Darkshore. The rest of the Fourth War wasn't too different. The loss of King Rastakhan, the Zandalari fleet, the failure to assassinate the Proudmoors, and the arrest of Bane, who'd later be freed by the Alliance and Horde, put Sylvanas at the deep end. Fortunately, she still had her contact of Lady Ashvane thanks to Rexxar and Voltoise, who unbeknownst to them helped bridge the most beneficial ally of Queen Ajara and her Naga. Together, the two planned for the deaths of several of their enemies by sending them to their deaths in the realm of the Naga of Nazjatar. Ajara took great delight in the fact of her old enemy Malfurion Stormrage being dead because of Sylvanas, her only wish being able to see the deed herself, or at least being able to witness it for herself. Unfortunately for them both, the champions were successful in knocking down Ajara, and this would lead to the freeing of N'Zoth, who would take the Defiant Queen with him to Ny'alotha. In turn, the Horde and Alliance would unite against Sylvanas once and for all, with a bit of a twist. With Darkshore and Ashenvale both retaken at this time, Tyrande, Whisperwind, and her Kaldorei army would come for the head of Sylvanas Windrunner, and all those who worked alongside her. Tyrande cared not for the Horde that stood against her, so long as they didn't stand in her way. Tyrande hadn't arrived just yet, and made no mention to Anduin or the Alliance of her arrival either. Varrock was at first successful in challenging Sylvanas on a one-on-one Mak'gora, her calling him out for his failings in both Darkshore and Lordaeron, and how she trusted him and how he betrayed that trust. Varrock stood silently as began to fail in their fight, but wasn't about to give up and would lunge with both Shalamains in hand, slicing at Sylvanas' eye, injuring her. Sarfang spoke of hope and how the Horde would outlast them both, causing Sylvanas to spurt out in anger that the Horde and Alliance were nothing. Before either of them could do anything more in their bout, Tyrande Whisperwind would show up, the sky turning dark upon her arrival. All sides were unsure what to do, and Sylvanas went into a panic. She could easily handle Varrock, but was ill-prepared for the Night Warrior and her power. Not yet, at least. For a moment, Varrock acknowledged Tyrande. Normally, he would yell that this was his fight, but he knew full well what burdened her heart, and that he had felt the same way with Drenash and his mate. Tyrande, still wrapped up in all her fury and anger, would focus sorely on Sylvanas. Together, Varrock and Tyrande would charge at the Dark Lady. Maybe Varrock would get in her way, but this was just as much his fight as it was hers, and if he would die in the crossfire, so be it. Sylvanas would initially fight with her daggers against the two, but opted instead to start using the gifts that she had received from the Maw, when the battle started to be in their favor, blasting away at both Varrock and Tyrande, and then quickly vanishing into the sky. Tyrande would be unscathed by the blast, but Varrock was not so fortunate, and would be dead. Tyrande growled out in fury, and the armies that she had brought with her would leave. Her goal was to bring Sylvanas to justice, and Sylvanas retreated once more with a tail between her legs. Anduin called out to her, but to no avail. They would have to reconvene another time regarding everything. The Horde was far more hesitant to allow the rebels into Orgrimmar because of this. In fact, some of them outright got violent and were forced to be put down. Regardless, the Horde that did remain were able to at least understand that Sylvanas had betrayed them. However, Varrock fought side by side with Tyrande, who disrupted the Mak'gora, some feeling that he dishonored himself, while others were unsure due to the circumstances of everything after what Sylvanas had just said, resulting in a very mixed funeral and a far more violent turnout between the Horde and the remaining loyalists. Nathanos, Galliwix, and several other loyalists escaped sometime during their fight, either due to Sylvanas' orders or when Tyrande showed up. Nathanos meeting with Sylvanas at Windrunner Spire just before her journey to Icecrown, and Nathanos' own mission to take out Bwonsamdi. An armistice would be formed between the Horde and Alliance thereafter, with the Horde forming its own council with its new leaders to replace the Warchief position. Tyrande was against such a treaty until Sylvanas' head was ripped straight from its shoulders for what she had done to Malfurion. Anduin was left dismayed over this, but couldn't truly fault Tyrande for her feelings. Tyrande would leave Stormwind City for Teldrassil to make plans to seek out the Dark Lady and all those who still followed her. The Fourth War was ended. Sylvanas successfully defeated Bolvar the Lich King and tore apart the Helm of Domination, thus opening the veil and allowing her to enter into the Maw to begin her and the Jailer's plans. The leaders of the Alliance and Horde would be abducted, such as Thrall, Bane, and Anduin Wrynn, while Tyrande would be able to fend off the Mawsworn who tried to take her. The Scourge would go rampant across all of Azeroth, and Tyrande would pay a visit to Nathanos Blightcaller. There, she would demand where Sylvanas had gone, after quickly beating him and showcasing how much her power had grown. Nathanos would answer and proceed to add insult to injury over those who fell in the War of Thorns, and her beloved Malfurion. Tyrande would deprive Sylvanas of her own lover as a result. Even if he did end up in the Maw with her, his mortal and undeath life was now over. She would mutter to herself quietly for Malfurion. Much later, the remaining leaders of the Horde and Alliance would gather at Icecrown, where they would devise a plan to hunt down Sylvanas and save those who were captured. Tyrande would leap into the Shadowlands to achieve her goals. While the rescue was unsuccessful and all of them would be taken back into Torghast and rescued again later, Tyrande would enter in the Maw in search of Sylvanas. While there, she would find the Net of Souls lost in the War of Thorns, and with the aid of the Mawwalker and her daughter Chandra's Feathermoon, they would be ferried to Ardenweald. Tyrande would also go to search for Malfurion, to no avail. Tyrande, still wrapped in her quest for vengeance fueled by the Night Warrior's power, would continue to search for Sylvanas throughout Torghast, until eventually succeeding in finding the Banshee Queen in her assault in Ardenweald. The two would have their battle and share practically the same dialogue as they had before, and unfortunately, Elune would not allow Sylvanas to expel the entire power of the Night Warrior to slay Sylvanas. Sylvanas once more would escape and return successfully alongside a corrupted Anduin to the jailer, and Ysera, a great friend to Tyrande, would place her in a sleep-filled state after this. Hohenheim Mountain would be successful in finding the other Night Warriors across all the other afterlives, where together they would perform a ritual to siphon off the powers of the Night Warrior. There, Elune and her sister, the Winter Queen, would have their heart-to-heart, and Tyrande would be left to make a decision to choose renewal or choose vengeance. A decision that she would not make immediately. Over time, the Kyrian would send the Mawwalkers to uncover the whereabouts of Uther's missing soul piece, where they would also uncover the other powerful souls in Zobaal's personal chambers. While there, they would bring the soul of Malfurion Stormrage back to Ardenweald, where Malfurion would not only find peace, but would also be able to embrace his wife yet again. The two would have a long heart-to-heart and spend as much time as possible with one another. Malfurion would also learn of what Tyrande did, and would be understanding, but also very concerned for her. He would not want her to destroy herself for him and their people. With him gone, he believed now more than ever the Kaldorei needed her to lead them. He knew that she could do well without him, as she had done so before. With Malfurion finding peace, Tyrande would let go of her revenge quest. However, she would not forgive Sylvanas, and not forgive the Horde. And that is where I'll be ending it. As always, I didn't want to diverge too differently from the established lore and canon. I just wanted to make some tweaks here and there in the way that I could. I'm sure there'll be many upset with the choices I made or didn't make, and I'm expecting that, as it was a horrendous move to have either Teldrassil or Malfurion be lost at all. And I do think if Tyrande was able to choose renewal after the loss of countless lives of Teldrassil, I think she'd be able to with Malfurion's death as well. Especially if he urges her to live on and not choose death. But what do you all think? Do you think I should have altered things far more? Do you like how Malfurion went out? Leave your thoughts on this what if down below. And let me know what other what if realities you would like to see in the near future. Be sure to like, subscribe, and check out my other social medias in the description. You can also join my community on our Discord, where we talk about all sorts of other stuff. And if you like me enough, you can support me on my Patreon like these amazing folks here. But until next time, folks,